It is Friday, March 17th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of LTPS. Hopefully, you had a good week, and we've always got some PlayStation news to go over, so let's get you brought up to speed. First up, as always, our PS Plus reminder: the March PS Plus Essential Games are still live on PSN, so make sure you claim those. We also have the full PS Plus Extra and Premium lineup as well, which is going live on March 21st. Now, we saw some of these during that most recent State of Play, but we now have the full lineup. So, as a reminder, Chia is going to be a day one title on PS Plus Extra, which is, super cool when they do that. But we also have Ghostwire Tokyo, Life is Strange True Colors, Immortals Phoenix Rising, DBZ Kakarot, Untitled Goose Game, Final Fantasy Type 0 HD, also Neo The World Ends With You. Just another rock solid month for PS Plus Extra, looking really good there. But as we go over to PS Plus Premium, say the line, Bart, only 3 new games. So we've got Ridge Racer Type 4 for PS1, Ape Academy 2 for PSP, and Siphon Filter Dark Mirror for PSP as well. Now, there is something a little bit interesting going on here. So we have Ape Academy 2, which is cool because that game actually did not launch in North America. So, there's not many regional variances where that happens, but when it does, it's cool that, they could add these games back into the program for everybody on a global scale. I like that a lot. Hopefully we'll see more, but we're seeing the same problem arise again where Siphon Filter Dark Mirror, it's the PSP version. Now, for many people, they consider that a PSP game first and foremost. That's how it came out, but there is a superior PS2 version available, and I say that more so because in the context of PS4, PS5, there are still no accessibility options to remap face buttons to the second analog stick, or the right stick in this case, right? If you want that for third, first-person shooters, twin-stick shooters, I mean, it would be more preferable to either be able to remap those controls or just get the PS2 version if there is one available. So Sony is still doing this for the time being. That's fine, but just give us the option. Otherwise, it's actually better to play these games on a PlayStation Vita, of all things, which I'll still advocate for. There's no problem playing games there, but another kind of whatever month for PS Plus Premium. Now, going back to Chia as a day one title, we saw that and also Stray launching into PS Plus Extra, but we actually have confirmation of another day one PS Plus game for April, so launching April 4th on PS Plus Essential, which is the base tier, not Extra or Premium, but that is going to be Meet Your Maker. So not often that Sony does this, although I guess we could say recently they are doing more day one titles, but yes, Meet Your Maker is launching day one on PS Plus, and we will find the remainder. We'll find out what the remainder of the PS Plus April games are going to be, but at least we know one of them is Meet Your Maker launching directly into PS Plus Essential. Now, I'm sure most of you probably saw this, but there was yet again another PS5 system software update, and that's kind of the tradition where, a big update will go out, and then, 1 or 2 weeks later, there's a 0.01 update that is very small, and it only has one changelog item, which is improving system performance, which if you update it on console, that's what it's going to show, but if you go to PlayStation.com, it does say it was actually for fixing an issue that was causing Discord voice chat to disconnect. And maybe there was 1 or 2 other fixes in there. I know some people are complaining about how the Friends Who Play module on the UI is not updating. So maybe they also fixed that for people that were running into that issue. I do find that oftentimes PSN just is very slow with fetching that kind of data for those modules on the console's UI. So sometimes if you wait long enough, it does eventually appear, but that's just how the console is very finicky there. Next up, let's address the issue with PS3 and PS Vita downloads, which this came up like a little over, a week ago? It was a Reddit thread that popped up, and usually I don't jump on these right away because with PS3 and Vita, I don't know if common's the right word here, but it just, occasionally these consoles do have problems that sort themselves out within a few days once Sony is aware of it. But it was something where I actually did get these error codes. So on PS3 it was 800-29509. Vita it would have been NP99480. But during the PS3 online video, in this footage I'm downloading the Mass Effect 3 online pass, which you don't need to do, but I was just doing it in the moment for experimenting and things, and I got that error code. So it did happen. It was real, but it seems like people already are like the problem's gone, right? So no false alarm, basically nothing crazy going on just yet for PS3 and Vita downloads or the PS Store, but these things do occasionally come up for these things, and it's not all too surprising, at least right now. Moving on to the Horizon Forbidden West Burning Shores DLC, which is still coming out on April 19th, although we don't have any details on pricing or how big the content is or anything just yet. But we did hear from the game's director on the PlayStation blog about how they're focusing on purely PS5 now, because there is no PS4 version of this content, where he says, and I quote here, "On Horizon Forbidden West, everything we added or increased was something we'd need to have a plan around how to optimize for PS4 as well. On Burning Shores, since we can just focus on PS5, we've been able to charge forward, and we're really excited about what we've been able to pull off in creating the stunning post-apocalyptic version of Los Angeles. Another notable one is a particular battle scene that requires a lot of memory and processing power. To achieve this grand vision both technically and creatively, we definitely were thankful for the many advantages that PS5 hardware brings." Now, there is a lot of, I guess, PR speak in there, as in like he's saying a lot with saying very little, like that doesn't tell us much of anything. But at the very least, I think we can point out that we are getting to that period where a lot of first-party teams are transitioning and they're making that hard cutoff. Even something like Horizon, where it's got a PS4 version, but now we're saying that no, this content is only for PlayStation 5, and that does afford us certain advantages. We are in that phase now, which is exciting. Although always worth mentioning that for the 10 plus live service titles that Sony is working on, it wouldn't surprise me if many of those are still going to ship on PS4, especially when live service titles often benefit from, in terms of visuals not being all that demanding, right? If we're talking about a very sort of modest approach to what the game is supposed to be and look like, and the gameplay features that it's, what they're trying to accomplish, going for a more modest approach, allowing it to ship on PS4, PS5, also, low spec PCs, that's an advantage there, of course. But when we're talking about AAA, standard single player experiences from these teams that Sony has, it seems like they're finally all on PlayStation 5 finally. And it will be interesting to go through this content and, try and see if there is anything in there that really does stand out as a sort of particular thing that maybe would have been, maybe not, I don't want to say not possible on PS4, right? You can always make sacrifices to get something running on lower spec boxes, but, something that maybe does stand out from a visual point of view, where it's like, or maybe there's a lot of things on screen that just kind of makes you think, wow, this is really cool to see on PS5, and it might not have been the same experience on PS4. Now, getting into our big news story from this past week is the possibility of a PS5 Pro launching sometime later next year. So, a lot of you probably remember the times that we've talked about PS5 Pro here on this channel, so that's why this story is pretty interesting. So, first, let's go over the news. So, Tom Henderson, writing for InsiderGaming.com, has put out a new report claiming sources have confirmed that a PS5 Pro is in development and that it could launch around late 2024. In this report, Tom also briefly implies that he was given details about the console, but that he'll have to wait until a later date before he publishes a story on that. He also mentions that the next generation, PlayStation 6, is unlikely to release until at least 2028. Now, this is surprising because it's only a rumor at this point, sure, but for those that have been following Insider Gaming and Tom's work, I have no clue how he's been getting this kind of access, but he's got a really solid source at Sony because he's nailed the last two dates for when new PS5 system updates were coming out, and mostly correct on what was in those updates, albeit the last one he did claim it was going to have PS5 game streaming, which was not the case, but those dates were correct. The DualSense Edge story was correct. The new headsets and monitors from Sony's in-zone product lineup was correct. And we still have rumors about a detachable disk drive PS5 entering production in April for release this September, and also new wireless earbuds and a more premium headset coming as well. Those are all from Tom, so there's more that needs to be confirmed, but he's had a really good he's got good accuracy here, so it's worth paying attention to when he puts out a story. So with that in mind, a PS5 Pro. So, the times that we've talked about this, I've said before, like, I feel like that's not going to be a thing this generation. But the caveat that I always add to that is that if we get one, it would be on a different timetable where it's much later. Now, 2024 still seems soon to me. I would have figured 25, 26, but the timetable thing is important because really as of right now, that means no way we're getting a PS5 Pro this year, and that would be the only comparable we can make, which is PS4 Pro. We've only had one other, mid-cycle update, so there's not much history to reference here to kind of make those comparables, but, PS4 Pro showed up, year 3 of PS4, but that was also a very different circumstance. So this is why we can't just look at the PS5 Pro thing and think, oh, they did it before, they'll do it again. I mean, maybe that's actually happening, but there are different circumstances this time around, which is why I have said, I don't feel like it's going to happen unless it's maybe much further out, because there's just things are different, right? So for those that, maybe forgot this, I mean, PS4 Pro was in a situation where they were able to affordably offer that thing at $400, which is the price that PS4 initially launched at. They were able to drop the base console price, and that console was positioned as a way to offer 4K games with the adoption of 4K televisions and monitors, right? It made sense in that time where you could affordably offer a 4K console. And also this was at a time where Sony leadership was actively, they considered PC a competitor market, right? They felt that, people were transitioning away from consoles to PCs. That was the old PlayStation leadership. So there's a lot of factors at play as to why PS4 Pro made sense at the time when it did. And also worth remembering that PS5 Pro is not some kind of high volume machine. It was 1 in 5 PS5 sold on 1 in 5 PS4 sold, on average. But it's still something where it's good for, consumer retention. You keep the average price high per box sold, right? It's just, so there's obviously good things to it, but that's not the same thing as PS5. Now, I do find it's more about does it make sense and less about what a PS5 Pro can be, because that's not really, there's nothing to be said there. We know what it could be. It will be on paper a more powerful console. They'll bump the CPU, memory, maybe more onboard SSD storage, lean more into hardware accelerated ray tracing. They have to lean into something for marketing purposes. So it's not going to fill the same role that PS4 Pro filled back in 2016, but you have to lean into something. And so that's likely what it will be. We can even look at the games we're playing today and know that, okay, in theory, a PS5 Pro that comes in, if you're playing something right now that has a high frame rate mode that's unlocked and the average is 80 to 90 FPS, then, that game doesn't even have to get a patch. A PS5 Pro would just play that game and probably push it to 120. So we all know what it could do in theory, right? But it's more a matter of, does it make sense in the same context that PS4 Pro did? I find it hard to believe that Sony would say drop the price of base PS4s or base PS5s and then say offer this thing at $500, but maybe they're feeling bold and they'll release it at $600. I mean, yes, PS4 Pro, or yes, PS5, I'm getting so mixed up here. Yes, base PS5s today are $400, but the majority of consoles they sell have that disk drive. And even with this detachable model coming in, that's more for them to streamline production, right? It's still probably going to be an 80-20 split in all likelihood, where they're selling mostly the $500 box. So I can't really picture a situation where, in terms of the current market conditions, where they release it at an affordable price. And I do still think it's worth mentioning, you do a PS5 Pro, okay, we all know what it will look like, but then you're kind of taking away from what a PS6 is going to do during a time where there's just more and more diminishing returns, right? So, I don't know, I would almost prefer to just have PlayStation 5, which is completely serviceable for the next 4, 5, 6 years, and most people, even with a Pro, will likely be happy playing on that, but just a matter of, stick with that for well into 2027, 28, like Tom says, if that's around when they're aiming for, which, that's not hard to guess, but, around that time, we can eventually have PS6, and there's enough there to where it will be sort of justified as a decent jump, right? There's still so many people today that complain about PS5 not feeling like a next-gen machine, but, at this point in time, I would maybe not want to take away from what the next hardware is going to be able to do with a half-step console. But there are also external factors at play, so maybe, Microsoft is doing one, and you don't want to be the only platform holder that's not also offering something, halfway into the life cycle. I mean, Nintendo did come in with an OLED model that was more expensive than the launch Switch, so... But that's the whole point, right? Everything's different. This is all speculative, so we'll have to, as I like to say, wait and see on this, but... PS5 Pro, it would still be at a delayed timeline versus PS4 Pro, so perhaps that's why we're only hearing about it until now, but that was the most recent news on the possibility of a PS5 Pro. Moving on to some Naughty Dog and The Last of Us news, because this past week we saw the series finale for The Last of Us HBO, so there's been a lot of Last of Us news to talk about. So first up we have, speaking during Kind of Funny's spoiler cast for HBO's The Last of Us series, Neil Druckmann did make a comment on the studio's future game. So this is where he says, and I quote, "I know the fans really want The Last of Us Part 3. I hear about it all the time. All I can say is that we're already into our next project. The decision has already been made. I can't say what it is, but that's the process we went through, that there was a lot of consideration of different things, and we picked the thing we were most excited for." Now, he did also touch on the Last of Us multiplayer game. He says that that is indeed Naughty Dog's next game, and that we'll hear more about it later this year. He also confirms what we already knew about the studio in recent years, is that they've got, a lot of directors, writers, producers, and they've all been structured in a way that the studio is now handling multiple projects. So we already knew that, but that's the latest comment on the next sort of big Naughty Dog project that's not the multiplayer game. Although I will say, for that multiplayer title, I was really hoping this thing would be shown off and playable by the first half of this year. By the way he's saying that, that doesn't sound like that'll be the case. Now, I will be blown away if this thing does not show up at this rumored PlayStation showcase, which may finally appear within the next 1 to 2 months, at least before June or around E3. But I would be really surprised if we don't at least see it by then. Playable, that's a huge toss-up, but I still think we're going to have some kind of early access beta or something like that. Either way, I'm not sure there's much to be said about his comment on what the next game is going to be. It's, there's nothing there. Of course, he can't comment directly on it. He's not going to say if it is Part 3 or not. We can just, speculate on what we would prefer, and I'm kind of a 60-40 on it. I would, especially right now with so much Last of Us stuff going on, the show just being over, so it's something where, I would like a Part 3, but I'm still leaning more towards the new IP. It takes so long for these games to come out. So if we're talking about something where they're already going to be tied up doing something Last of Us related, which at this point is the multiplayer game, not quite a single player experience, obviously, but if we're going to do that, give me the new IP. Let's do Part 3 after that, right? So that's where I stand on it, but that's the latest comment out of Neil. Now, talking more about The Last of Us HBO, we can say that the final episode, episode 9, that broke records. So that was, its own record, I should say. So it debuted at 8.2 million viewers. So that would be the biggest debut for the entire series. The final episode, just barely beating, I forget which one had 8.1, but that was pretty close. But it did achieve that number while also competing for that time during the airing of the Oscars. And also, it's now available on Amazon Prime, iTunes, Sky Go, it's on Hulu. So, before, depending on where you were, it was only on one service like HBO Max, but now it's everywhere. And it's also getting a DVD, Blu-ray, and UHD release. Really cool to see. There's going to be some bonus content on there, so that's really cool. And we can also say that during this time, of course, Neil and Clegg, they're on a press junket, so a lot of interviews all over the place talking about the confirmed season 2, right? And so we've got some details there to go over. So both Neil and Clegg were recently speaking with GQ about the series finale and when getting into season 2 and what it's going to look like. Clegg said, and I quote here, "There are going to be things that are going to be different, and there are things that are going to be identical. There are things that are going to be added or enriched. There are some things that are going to be flipped. Our goal remains exactly what it was for the first season, which is to deliver a show that makes fans happy." Now, I will say, I saw a lot of places kind of run with the sort of easy, I hate saying it, but the easy clickbait here of oh, he said it's going to be different. Well, he also said it's going to be the same. He also said it's going to be approached like the first season. So I know the sort of easy gut reaction here is to sort of phrase it as, oh, hey, the controversial second game that's getting a second season, they're going to change it. But the way I read this is we're going to approach it like the first season, which is that a lot of it is following the exact same story beats. You know, they do certainly flip things, they do skip sequences, they do alter dialogue, they sometimes will dramatically change it like episode 3, but otherwise I think we're still probably going to get part 2's story. So at least that's how I'm reading it, but I will say that it's, I guess, I don't know if encouraging is the right word, but he more or less kind of threw everybody off with that comment saying that, yeah, we're going to be doing all these things, and but how we approach the first season is likely how we're going to do it with the second season. Now, he did also provide, well, they provided a lot of details about the second season, so we'll kind of do sort of a Spitfire thing here. So what we did learn is that the second game, it will cover more than one season. So we don't know how many seasons, but they more or less confirmed that it's going to be more than one. We don't know if it's 2, 3, or more, just more than one season. We also learned that despite the time skip between the games, Bella Ramsey is not going to be recast. They are all in on her performance and her being Ellie for the second season. We also heard that it is possible we'll see more infected, or perhaps different kinds of infected. This was them addressing the criticisms of there being so few infected during season 1. And also just a cool little tidbit here, but Ashley Johnson's cameo on that last episode where, kind of a spoiler alert here, but where she plays Ellie's mother, Anna, that was from an idea that originally was planned to be an animated short, and that didn't go through, so then it was possibly another game, but that also never materialized, and that was around when the first game came out. But so that idea finally was able to, reprise itself with this little cameo before the kickoff of episode 9, which was cool to see. I liked it a lot. And I guess my sort of review of the series now that it's over, or at least my impressions of it, because it's a lot of what I said during last week's episode of LTPS. So it all holds there, where it would have been nice to have 1 or 2 more episodes, just a little bit of breathing room on this back half of the show. I don't want it to be, or rather, I didn't want it to be like, 19, 20 something episodes, something absurd where they really stretch it out and every single moment that happens in the game is in the show. It's okay if they sort of skip things where it makes sense, and that's a lot of the combat sequences and a lot of the, jumping into or exploring, searching file cabinets and things. Obviously that stuff does not need to be there, but there are certain parts that I think would have added a good amount of tension, maybe more room for dialogue and more of that development between Ellie and Joel that makes it seem a little bit more progressive than it did if you're coming from playing the games. Again, it's something where if you play the games, it feels a bit rushed, but if you didn't, then it might have been a tight 9 episode series that felt like it made sense the entire way through. But for me, I would have liked just a little bit more. Now, I will say that last episode, I loved some of the lines in that one. So again, spoiler if you haven't seen the last episode just yet, but the line of, I'll follow you wherever you go, or and this was an added segment where Joel is very open about a suicide that he tried to do on day 2 after the outbreak happened, looking at her in the eyes and saying, it wasn't time that did it, referring to their relationship, healing his wounds, and then the sort of very somber, crazy, like 1.5, 2-minute sequence of him in the hospital just going on essentially a massacre. That scene, that's the one benefit, is that scene had a lot more weight, having not had Joel kind of be what Joel is in the games, right? So, killing a bunch of infected and raiders and things, only having a few on-screen kills up until this point. That scene hit pretty hard, and that was like, it's weird to say cool, but like, it was just a raw moment that I think landed exactly how they wanted it to. But for the most part, I would say it was a great show that really, I think, did the games justice in a way that most other adaptations never come even close to doing. Now, I really thought we were about to go 1 full week without any major updates for the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard, but that is not the case because both the CMA and the FTC recently published new documents. Nothing insane here, but it is something where with the CMA, we're seeing more third-party responses. These responses are to their provisional findings report, which we only had Sony and Microsoft's response to the remedies document, but this is the provisional findings responses. And it's this again highlights the issue that Sony has right now, where not very few companies, really nobody is on their side. It's just them, really making the argument against the acquisition. So we've got a bunch of responses here. First from 4J Studios, the only one that's named, the independent team behind the console editions of Minecraft. They describe a great relationship with Microsoft during the transition of ownership when Microsoft acquired Mojang, and they see no cause for concern over their future opportunities. Market Participant B says they believe no game is a must-have in this dynamic market, and they do not believe the transaction will negatively impact consumers. Market Participant C considers Microsoft trustworthy and finds consolidation inevitable across all platforms as we transition to cloud-based platforms. They also argue the acquisition would not be against the interest in UK consumers when the alternatives could possibly be an acquisition from Chinese-owned businesses like Tencent. Market Participant D says it's difficult to predict the effects of the merger, but they do specify they don't expect any risks to their own business as a AAA games publisher. Market Participant E explains their experience selling games on Xbox and PlayStation, saying despite the smaller player base, Microsoft Store and Game Pass gives them more visibility in sales versus PlayStation. As such, they see benefits from the acquisition, where it can create a more level playing field. Market Participant F is also in favor of the acquisition. They find arguments against it exaggerated, and they also think a new home at Microsoft could lead to better working conditions for their colleagues. Now, as expected, Activision, Microsoft, and Sony gave the longest responses, but to summarize these, Activision spent 20 pages more or less saying cloud gaming sucks. Genuinely, it's just them downplaying the importance of it. And Sony, kind of the same stuff we've heard how many times over, but they do bring up Destiny, which they now own, and they use that as an example of how small it is in comparison to Call of Duty. Microsoft, an 84-page response. They always respond with the most, which makes sense, but it's also the same stuff. And again, the juicy info is more often than not redacted. But they do openly specify their plans for day-and-date Game Pass titles for Activision content and how that will enhance console gaming rivalry. There's also a part in here where the lawyer seems to have messed up by writing Superman down as a PlayStation exclusive, but that was probably where they meant to write Spider-Man. So yeah, it's a lot of the same stuff, but with more third-party responses. We're continuing to see the issue of how Sony is truly on their own here, because under this circumstance, they're the only closely competing platform holder where this could eventually at some point, greatly affect their business. And then you've got, Sony as a market leader, you've got Microsoft preaching all these good things that very much can and, could happen in the short term. Also, a bunch of third parties saying that this either doesn't affect them or it's actually a benefit. So you can see the uphill battle that Sony has had during this entire time. And that's why it's just, it's been so one-sided with how it looks. But, there is something that happened with the FTC recently. So they filed a motion against Microsoft because they're not providing enough documents that they're requesting. So the FTC is alleging that after 5 weeks, they've only come up with 8 documents out of the requested 32, and they're looking for more details on the Nintendo and Nvidia deals, Microsoft's next generation gaming ecosystem, and also the ZeniMax media exclusivity plans. Now, it could be something where they're just, taking too long, or they're just kind of playing some sort of, frustration game with the FTC, or maybe they're obviously being reluctant because the entire point is to not sort of produce documents that you don't have to, that may not be, you don't want to produce something that is very clearly going to be used against you, and that's like the whole Sony when they were subpoenaed thing, right? Like they tried to get out of a bunch of documents, trying to claim it was going to be a burden to look for all those documents, which, that's a very real thing. You can make that sort of argument if it's a burden to the point where it's like too costly and it doesn't make any sense financially for the business to do that. But you can't, obviously they were using that in a sort of bad faith way to get out of producing those documents. Could be something here with Microsoft as well, where they don't want to have those things used against them in this situation. But I don't think there's much to really add here just yet. But I'm sure we'll talk about this again soon. Now, moving on to some very cool news, which is Sony's Shuhei Yoshida is going to be recognized for his time and commitment and contributions to this industry with the BAFTA's Fellowship Award, their highest honor. He'll receive the award on March 30th during the live stream, and this is a pretty big deal for him in his career. Shuhei, of course, has been with PlayStation since the very beginning, way back in 1993, filling a producer role on all these titles, being there for the development and launch of the first PlayStation, all these PlayStation games throughout the years. Eventually, he led Sony's first-party teams from 2008 to 2019 during the restructure, and that's where he then became the head of the indie initiative at PlayStation. But everybody knows Shuhei, so it's always cool when he gets recognition for his time and what he's given back to this industry. The man just seems so, at least from appearance, funny, approachable, charismatic, somebody you'd want to work with or, have their backing on your project. Just somebody that has done a lot over a 30-year period. And we've had so many Shuhei stories over the years, and I'm sure there's many more that, fall under that trial and tribulation area. And I always love hearing these things from behind the scenes. And so over time, I'm sure we'll get more of it. And there is going to be that, eventuality where Shuhei leaves Sony, retires, and perhaps that's when we'll hear more about his time and tenure at the company. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. And if you would like to win a different prize this week, we have a code for Horizon Call of the Mountain, the PSVR 2 launch game from Firesprite and Guerrilla Games. It's an EU-UK code, so just keep in mind any console can play it, so anybody can enter, but you do need a EU or UK code to redeem from that storefront, but then you can play the game just fine. So if you'd like to win, then follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to give away a PSVR 2 game. Those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about to you all from this past week, and our Tuesday video was PS3 Online in 2023. So yes, it's finally here. I know many of you look forward to that. So it is done. PS3 Online is getting both better and kind of worse at the same time, right? So it's a weird situation, but you can go check out this year's edition. And as always, another video on Tuesday as per usual, but that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.